Hi, I'm Megan West with My Faith Votes. So glad you can join us today. Well, this week, a very significant case took place at the Supreme Court that could potentially overturn Roe v. Wade. And someone who is there is Melissa Ohden. Melissa is actually an abortion survivor herself, and she was on the steps of the Supreme Court for the hearing this week. And full disclosure, Melissa and the Abortion Survivors Network that she founded and runs is very special to me because I have the honor of serving on the board of directors for the organization. But would you please welcome Melissa Ohden? Hey, Melissa, great to see you.
Great to see you. Thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you for all you do. And you have had a whirlwind week. But before we get into the court case, just for people who don't know your story, share a little bit about just your impactful testimony and where you've come from and how you've gotten here today.
Absolutely. If people didn't see me outside the Supreme Court, I held a sign that said, "Babies survive abortions. I'm one of them." And that is my story in, just one sentence. 44 years ago, I survived a saline infusion abortion that was forced upon my birth mother. My abortionist had written on the medical records, he thought she was 18 to 20 weeks, but the fact that I weighed almost 3 pounds after I was accidentally born alive after soaking in a toxic salt solution for 5 days, that indicated to the medical professionals she was probably more like 31 weeks gestation. And so, like many babies in that position, I was initially not provided medical care, but at least one nurse intervened to rush me off to the NICU. And, it's been a long and complicated journey to get to where I am today. But in the grand scheme of things, I was adopted and loved and then reunited with my biological mother. And I'm just grateful for the life that God has given me.
Well, and now you work with the Abortion Survivors Network, the only advocacy and healing organization for abortion survivors and their families in the entire world. And that's highly significant. And I think something people don't realize is there are survivors of an abortion. And talk about the organization just a little bit and how many that you've already worked with.
Yeah, abortion survivors are not mythical. We're very real. We're real people with real needs that have gone, sadly, untreated in our culture for decades. And so this is where we come in as an organization. We provide healing groups and retreats and community support. We provide, peer support. We do educational Zooms, all of these things. We support families who have experienced failed abortions because we know statistically, Megan, there are probably at least 20,000 people like me in the United States alone. Based on the CDC themselves admitting as early as 1981, they were estimating 400 to 500 live births a year after failed abortions. And we know, through your work with us, that this is something that still happens today. It isn't just something that happened to me 44 years ago. Babies survive chemical abortions, vacuum aspirations, DNCs, dismemberment. That list goes on. And so, we very much exist. And now is the time, as we're seeing maybe a post-Roe America. What does that look like? It looks like people like me and families like mine being freed up to have the space to say, you know what, I've been hurt by abortion and I need help.
Yeah, and you have a voice that we rarely hear about in the whole debate on pro-life, pro-choice, pro-abortion. And it's fascinating just to hear all of the survivors that you've worked with and giving them a voice to speak about this issue. So you have a unique take on what has happened at the Supreme Court this week. So back up a little bit and tell us just, first of all, what was the environment like on the steps of the Supreme Court? And then we'll get into a little bit more about what happened within the court hearing.
It was incredible. I was slated to possibly speak at the rally. And so I was there at 7 a.m. And, it was such a beautiful time to be out on that sidewalk and run into so many people that have been serving in this movement even before Roe was passed. So there's something so beautiful, Megan, about all of the people who have been fighting so hard and doing the work day in and day out and likely going unacknowledged, unnoticed, who have led us to this point in history. And so it was beautiful. It was hopeful, huge turnout. So much joy. I mean, it's so much like the March for Life, but it was just filled with so much anticipation and so much gratitude for Attorney General Lynn Fitch and her team, the Solicitor General, who made such a compelling case to make it to the Supreme Court. It was beautiful.
Well, and I had the opportunity to listen to the whole hearing, and I would encourage anybody watching to go and look that up and listen to it's about 2 hours in length. And it's fascinating to hear the line of questioning from the justices, but also the answers and how things are worded in response to those questions to the justices. And I noticed one thing that really stuck out to me, and I'd love your take on this, but the side arguing for keeping Roe v. Wade and allowing for women to have an abortion, they rarely talked about the life of the child. It was more in terms of the fetus. But what they always said was that pregnancy was a burden and parenthood is a burden. And I just kept thinking that is so interesting that that's how they're framing it, that you essentially, essentially are burdens. And I'd love to hear your take on that, especially as an abortion survivor, and this whole notion that they didn't even refer to it as the child is a burden, but pregnancy and parenthood is a burden. And full disclosure, yes, parenthood is challenging, but it's not a burden, it's a blessing.
It is. Yeah. I mean, if you want to hear a funny story, I downloaded the arguments and I listened to them on a flight yesterday on my way back home to Kansas City. And I was sitting next to Sarah, Sarah in government affairs with us. And every time she would say something like that in the arguments, I was making a face, and I finally had to say, don't mind me. I'm going to be like this every time I hear these words, because I was picking up on that thread, Megan, and I was hearing women's liberty is dependent on Roe versus Wade standing. And as a society, we are reliant. We are reliant on Roe versus Wade. Isn't there something really sad and wrong about that? That we as a society have somehow become dependent on women having this supposed right to ending the life of their children? It's everything we've talked about over the decades in the pro-life movement. We know it doesn't just end a life most of the time. It impacts people and families and communities in our society. This is what Roe has done to us, that we heard those arguments. So not surprising, incredibly sad. The part for me that was so fascinating too, Megan, is that whole conversation about viability. And I think it was Justice Thomas, I can't remember who was saying it, but, in questioning said, doesn't the child always have an interest to life? Mm-hmm. Doesn't the child always have an interest to life, no matter what stage of viability that they're in?
Yeah. Right.
We know it to be true. And so, the other side's arguments were so much about everything we always hear. But every once in a while, did you catch what I did? They said baby a couple times. And kind of enforced because of the questions from the justices. They had to say that and acknowledge that. So that was interesting. But yeah, the whole premise that pregnancy and parenthood is a burden, and even talking about the fact that abortion should be legal because people may be in circumstances where it would be better not to have the baby. And from a biblical worldview, that's just such a foreign thing to hear in such a public forum at the center of the Supreme Court. So, and I was talking to our 13-year-old about this, and you've probably had similar conversations with your kids. I said, hon, one of the things I kept hearing them say is, without Roe and Doe, women will not have full rights. Did you catch that? Because I heard them say that. So Roe and Doe is what gives women full rights. And I had said, you break down this argument with me, honey, at the age of 13. What's wrong with this argument? And she could point out everything that's wrong with that from a biblical standpoint, from a women's empowerment standpoint, all of those things. I would love, wouldn't it be interesting, Megan, if we could hear from everyday people, no matter what they believe about abortion, to say, how did those arguments impact you? What did you think about that? If you weren't being affected by the media that wants to control the narrative and how you feel about this, wouldn't it be interesting to hear what people thought of that?
Mhm. And like you say, it's the power of the words and those subtle words and those actually very distinct words that came out that I would encourage people just to go back and listen to the hearing because it's very eye-opening to what the argument is.
Mhm.
And just for the audience who may wonder, well, when's the ruling coming down? So we're not expecting a ruling till maybe even early summer.
Mhm.
So what do you see happening and in this kind of period time, but also what the potential rulings could mean for abortion survivors, for abortion in the United States in general, depending on how they rule.
Yeah, I've seen the date thrown out of actually June 26th to nail it down pretty hard. That's when
Mm.
they suspect that the ruling may come out. And, for people who haven't heard the arguments yet, I'll break it down into really
Mm.
three scenarios that could happen. They could, rule against Dobbs, which means Roe stands the way that it is. They could uphold the Dobbs case and leave Roe standing, which would be a really strange path to
Mm.
try to walk out. And the third, which is where a lot of people are leaning, I was at a big dinner with the Alliance Defending Freedom and pro-life leaders across the nation and got to hear from the Attorney General and Solicitor General that evening after arguments. And the overwhelming feeling from everyone, and you're catching it in the media, even the liberal media, people really think the third thing is going to happen, and that is that they uphold Dobbs and they have to scale back Roe and Casey. And it gives me chills, Megan, every time I say it because I believe it. And not
Mm.
just because I've lived with this hope throughout my life, but I believe it because of what we saw and we heard happen in the court this week.
Mm. And it's a
So
call to be
that's
praying. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
And now is the time for people to pray. And so,
Mm.
that's that's what really the three options are that could happen. And so, what are we going to see in the next few months? We're going to see what we're already starting to see happen. So, I was at an event in Kansas yesterday. They have a ballot measure coming up for value them both because in Kansas, a number of years ago, their liberal activist judges found that the Kansas Constitution had the right to abortion built into it. So that's been a fight going on for a little while that you're seeing that's going to take the stage. Even in my home state of Missouri, there's a flurry of legislation that's starting to be enacted because states are trying to prepare for, having the right to regulate abortion fall back under them. And so right now, I think it's 26 states already that are prepared to have laws or already have laws on the books that would protect and defend lives like mine if Roe falls in that third choice. And the power goes back to the people.
Right. And that was brought up a lot in the Supreme Court hearing that put it back to the people. That was said over and over again. But something that you do with your work with the Abortion Survivors Network is a lot of advocacy, and you've testified on Capitol Hill, you've testified in state legislatures. So kind of expand on that a little bit and share what is happening at the state level, because we've got three branches of government. And so we've got the Supreme Court hearing working on that aspect, but what's happening at the state level that you see right now that is maybe significant coming down the pipe that people should be aware of?
Yeah, now is a really important time for everyone to be watching what is happening in their own state and even really their own municipality. Because think of states like Texas where they have, created a lot of cities where it's a sanctuary city that protects and defends lives, and that shuts down abortion clinics. I'm going to be really honest, we're starting to see it. So there are options at the local level to protect lives like mine and save women like my biological mother from the suffering of abortion. So you can see things at that local level, but definitely on the state level, you see things like what we call, trigger laws, meaning, it wouldn't take effect right now, but they're enacting legislation that would be enforced. It would come into action when the rulings from the Supreme Court come into play. But I think it's important for us to understand that the other side very much has been afraid of this day coming. And so think of like 2019, where you and I know that we saw this aggressive abortion legislation sweeping the nation, Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, that list could go on and on. They were expanding state abortion to allow abortion up until the point of birth because But they knew this day was coming. And so I think what you're going to see is a lot of what we saw in 2019 is, yes, a lot of pro-life laws being enacted, but you're also going to see the other side fighting very, very hard to enact legislation that expands abortion, finds it in the state constitution, all of those things. And so I think that's what we're going to see happening. And so now is the time to pray. Now is the time to know what's happening in your state, in your community, and get involved. Be in touch with your legislators. They need to hear from you, and they need encouragement from you if they're doing the right thing. And so also being able to get involved with organizations that are making the difference in communities, saving lives like mine, and meeting the needs of women. We've been doing it for decades, right? The other side is pushing abortion as a solution. The pro-life movement is full of people who are meeting the needs of women, but just think about how much more we're going to need to keep meeting the needs of women.
Absolutely. And I will add, just because we're an organization called My Faith Votes, and actually you and I were at a dinner a few weeks ago with a number of pro-life advocates, and I was having a conversation with one woman who happened to be an attorney, and she didn't know my role with My Faith Votes, but she made the comment, she said, if people only knew how much their vote could impact life in this country, people would be amazed. And we see that all the time. So the power of showing up at the voting booth and voting for life is not insignificant. And we see that playing out in the legislature, in the Supreme Court, because whoever holds positions of authority within our government, they're making the decisions. And we have the power to elect those in and those out of the office. Are you seeing that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And we know that with the midterm elections coming up, this whole case is going to impact a lot of people. And so, yes, we need to put our faith into the ballot box and and not be afraid of that. People have tried to push me in a corner and say I'm a one issue voter. No, I'm not, but my faith guides my vote, and I'm not ashamed of that.
Amen. I would agree with you. Well, our time is wrapping up, but I want to cover one thing, but because I think it's so powerful to your story and really wraps things up from a beautiful biblical perspective. And that's what happened with your birth mom years later. Talk about that aspect of your story and how that's come full circle.
Yeah, and I'll push back a tear that wants to form in my eye, because what I haven't told most people is one of the text messages I got on Wednesday when I was outside of the rally and there for everything in DC. One of the texts I got, Megan, was from my birth mom that afternoon. And she said, I am so proud of you for being there today. She said, I'm always proud of you, but knowing that you're there and seeing you there, I am so proud of you. And that's one of the burning questions people always have is, do you know your birth mom? Do you have a relationship? We do. I mean, so many times other people tried to thwart her even knowing that I was alive. I mean, she spent over 30 years not knowing that I'd survived her abortion, but now we live in the same metro community. She is very much part of our lives. My children know her as another one of their grandmas. We have an incredible relationship, and she knows that I love her, and she is forgiven for that abortion that should have taken my life. And that's what I want for every woman. I want every child to have the opportunity to live like I was given, but I want every woman to be able to know that they're loved and forgiven and have that opportunity to have a relationship with their child, which goes against everything they were arguing before the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm. Well, your story is powerful and the work you are doing is amazing. And I'm honored to be able to be a very small part of that. But for those watching, you can visit Melissa and find out more about the Abortion Survivors Network at abortionsurvivors.org. Learn more, support the organization, just doing amazing work. And thank you for just the advocacy and the things that you are doing every day, Melissa. We really appreciate you. And we'll be praying for the Supreme Court ruling and that God would move on their hearts and life would prevail. Any final thoughts before we close out this time?
I just want to encourage people to, like you said, go back, listen to those arguments, go down places to learn more about things that they talked about, and be willing to not only pray and vote and take action, but have conversations with other people. I think it's a good time to do that.
It is. Well, have a great day. Thank you so much for all you're doing, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.